Hi everyone, I'm your host, Lee-Davies. I'm a filmmaker, entrepreneur, conservationist, and impact investor. And welcome to our Future Nature podcast. We aim to empower you with the insights and knowledge to navigate the increasingly complex landscape of tomorrow. So brace yourselves as we go on an exhilarating podcast adventure and dive deep into what it truly means to be human in the 21st century. We'll explore the critical issues of climate change, artificial intelligence, biohacking, and longevity, as well as other emerging threats to humanity. And we'll be interviewing the leading change makers, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs from around the world. Welcome to Our Future Nature. Let's get on with today's episode.
Today, I'm very lucky to have on the podcast Peter Allison, who is an author and a safari guide. And I was very lucky to have gone on safari with very recently in Botswana. And we hit it off, didn't we, Peter? So thank you for being on the show today. Peter, you're calling in from the UK, and I believe it's quite hot right now. Tell us a little bit about where you are.
Yeah, I'm in a little town called Shrewsbury, and I live here and haven't heard of it, so don't be embarrassed if you haven't. But it's mid-30s. I'm now a climate change advocate, but not in the Al Gore way. This is making England very livable. I quite enjoy this.
So actually, you don't seem to mind.
Oh, I'm going to burn some coal in the backyard. No, I mean, obviously climate change is a massive problem, but I think anybody now that's sitting there saying, oh, the science isn't in, it's just step outside. It's so obvious that the climate is going absolutely bonkers. My original hometown of Sydney just had a weekend where it recorded more rain than London does in a year. You know, weather patterns around the world are out of whack. You mentioned we were just in Botswana. We were there in June. And if you had said, what is the least likely thing for us to see after a pangolin? I would have said rain. And yet it poured on us. So, you know, and that is entirely unheard of. People with the longest, greyest beards have never had it rain in June before. So we're definitely living in a time of change. And apart from here in the UK, which is going to be very livable if it stays at this temperature, it's not doing the world any good.
And apparently the UK wine industry is getting a big bump from this because now they can actually grow decent amount of wine from grapes because of the warmer temperatures. So one of the few upsides from this rather depressing picture of climate heating.
Yeah, there's a vineyard not far from where I am, and I'm somewhere in the Midlands.
So Peter, how did you get to end up in Shrewsbury on one of the hottest days in the UK? You started off as a boy in Sydney, and somehow I read somewhere, probably on Wikipedia, that you ended up in Japan, and now you're a guide in Southern Africa and Botswana and Namibia. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this stage in your life.
Oh, we've only got an hour. Yeah, circuitously. When I was 16, my sister was finishing high school. She was going to leave for a year, as most people do finishing high school. I was desperate for my parents not to notice me, so I lied and got a scholarship to Japan. And that really ignited the travel bug, which is a very real disease, and probably the most expensive one to catch. And so by 19, I was looking for a change and tossed a coin between Africa and South America because of the wildlife in each one. Africa came up heads, and 2 weeks later, I was landing in Zimbabwe. This was 1994. And back then, because of apartheid, Qantas would not fly to South Africa. Nobody would, except UK airlines. And so landed in Zimbabwe, bumbled my way around a bit, and ended up as a barman in a safari lodge. And that, after 6 months, somebody fell over, somebody else coughed a few times, and they said, man down, men down. Very sexist industry. We need you to take a game drive. All you ever do is talk about animals. Gave me a rifle, keys to a Land Rover, and said, out you go. And it's a very exciting proposition. I was 19 years old. Growing up in Sydney, I'd not dealt with anything much more dangerous than a parrot. And the idea of being a safari guide was literally fantastic, the literal sense of the world. It was a fantasy. So I said, grab the keys, grab the rifle. I said, fantastic. Full disclosure, never touched a firearm before in my life, and also never driven a car. And yet I went out that afternoon.
You learned to drive in the bush without any instruction. And I presumably it's one of those industries where you just work your way up and learn as you go. But obviously in the bush, that can be quite fraught with danger, presumably. Did you have any mishaps along the way?
Oh, yeah. And a lot of them due to inexperience and lack of training. And I need to fly a flag for the industry and say that things have changed entirely in the almost 3 decades since, where now you do require a guiding license. I didn't even have a driver's license. It was such a cowboy time. And now you need a specific guide licenses to drive a boat that are independent of taking a vehicle safari, and certainly to walk on a safari. But back then it was just, if you were a warm body and willing and to take people out. I mean, I was willing, if not able. And that's actually something that carries you through, is just enthusiasm. You might have a guide who's incredibly technically proficient. They may well have won at Le Mans. They're such a great driver, and they're an Annie Oakley shot, and they know all the facts and figures. But if they turn to you and say, this is an African elephant, they live on average to around 60 years, running through 6 sets of teeth at that time, their digestive system is only 40% efficient, you're going to want to kill yourself. You're going to wish elephants were extinct so we'd stop talking about them. So I think when you've got someone who's excited about where they are and what they're showing, it helps your career, even if every other aspect is, I wasn't willingly unprofessional. I just was completely untrained. It was like turning up to watch a game of an international game of rugby, and you get handed a pair of boots and say, run on. Okay, I'll do it. Sorry, team. I'd want to play for England in that case, so they'd lose.
Oh, I think England just won the test actually with Australia.
Yeah, that's yes, exactly. They did. Yes, I'm just getting it out there before you brought it up.
And then some idiot in the stands was like saying to Eddie Jones, "You traitor, you traitor." And Eddie Jones got very upset, apparently.
Yeah, I don't know. You can accuse someone of treachery when they were fired. They were fired by Australia. What's he meant to do? I was like, oh, yes, I will never coach another team. There is, what is it? Half of all people in the world have a below average IQ.
That's definitely one way of putting it. Thank you for that perspective.
Yeah.
So you wrote this book, which achieved bestseller status, or according to Wikipedia, it did, called "Whatever You Do, Don't Run," and presumably that was based on all of your experience growing up in the bush with little to no experience and becoming Peter Allison, one of the most revered guides in Botswana. And I mean, for any of you out there who haven't had a read, it's hilarious. But my question is, like, what's more important to be a guide? Is it to actually know what you're talking about, or is it to entertain your guests? And tell us what actually makes a really good guide, because not many people have had the honor or the privilege or been lucky enough to go on safari.
I think it's actually a mix of both. I mean, if you are just a pure showman, it's all fluff and it's just the one-liners. What you're trying to do is, and I'm plagiarizing a bit from a friend of mine called Richard Field. He said a good guide should be a matchmaker, because it's very easy to say, look at this amazing environment in which I live or where I work. Isn't my office incredible? And you're kind of showing off your relationship with the bush or the desert, somewhere like Namibia, rather than allowing the people with you to form their own. Like, this is free love, baby. You know, it's just really your goal should be for everybody that travels with you to end out saying, that place is absolutely spectacular. And you want them to be desperate to get back there. And ideally, they'll be desperate to preserve it. And so if you've got no content, if you don't actually know what you're talking about, and you're not genuinely passionate about anything other than a tip, you're not a good guide. You're just running through you're an actor just reading the lines. So yeah, I think the passion and knowledge are every bit as important as personality.
Our Future Nature is brought to you today by Authentic Gallery. Authentic Gallery makes buying and collecting stunning and impactful art easy, with a high percentage of proceeds going towards our vetted partner charities. If you want to buy art and contribute to an impactful cause, well, check out Authentic Gallery. That's spelled AWETHENTIC gallery.com. As a special treat to my listeners, you can use the discount code OFNPOD. That's OFNPOD to get a 10% discount off all of my limited edition prints. So check out Authentic Gallery and start browsing now. Thanks very much. And what would you say is like your number one signal that this guide doesn't know what they're talking about if you're out there on a safari? How do you know if your guide knows what they're talking about versus someone that doesn't?
Okay, so if you arrive at a safari camp and you get driven back in, and the person's seen a yellow-billed hornbill and said it's a flying banana. As you went over the bumpy roads, they've said it's an African massage. Then when you see impala, they say African McDonald's. These are jokes that weren't funny when they were first said. And I think the very first humans who arose in Africa must have said they've been around forever. And it's just lazy. It's just lazy. Whereas if somebody's actually able to engage with you, basically, if you come into camp and the guy said all of that and you spot that there is a female guide in camp, ask to switch to her vehicle, because I guarantee you she's had to be twice as good to be considered half as good. She will be the best guide in the property. That's a tip which I probably shouldn't let out too often, but it's true.
I'm sure it's a very male-dominated industry, so it's probably no surprise that, yeah, if you see a female guide, and you don't see many of them. But I mean, did you now see more females coming into the industry?
Yeah, and it's quite often they've had to be dragged in. And that's the misogyny, funnily enough, is not from the industry, and it's that most people who come on safari, certainly at the luxury end, tend to be a bit older. They've had to accumulate wealth. It's not cheap coming on a luxury safari, so they've accumulated wealth, which typically, unless they were lucky enough to inherit it young, then, you know, let's just say they're a little bit closer to the reaper than they are to the stork. The stork's well in the rearview mirror and the reaper's getting closer. And so, and things like misogyny and racism don't get better with age. Those things tend to harden. So these people arrive and they see a woman and she weighs 50 something kilos. How's she going to save me from an elephant? And it's ridiculous because it's up to the vehicle and the driving. There's not a single physical effort. And I'm 80 kilos. That extra 30 kilos I have is of absolutely no advantage when it's a 5,500 kilogram elephant. That small margin there really doesn't add up to anything. So I think there was resistance from the guests. That's changed even in my time. Just, you know, when I was a kid, people would come and say, we went to the doctors today and there was a lady doctor. A lady. I was, my goodness. They weren't sure whether to be scandalized or so impressed by what this woman had achieved with her little lady brain. It's not even remarkable anymore. You literally do not remark on a female doctor. And I think within a decade, we could have that with safari guides. And it'll be great. It'll be great for the industry. Not even from a feminist perspective. It just means we're drawing from a pool of twice as many human beings. The quality, more competition for jobs. There will be better guides because they're going to have to be better to keep up with the women. I think it's can't happen soon enough.
You know, when you go out on safari, you realize that most animals and most of the research on the animals has been done predominantly by men. And you know that because most of the species are named after white colonial men. So there's a bit of a problem there in the whole taxonomy and the classification of nature, if you like. Like, is that a problem? You know more about the wild than I do. Is that a problem from an understanding point of view? Like, are we really understanding these animals if they've been described to us through the lens of a colonial white man?
Yeah, I think there's an absolute problem with that. And there's the two aspects, as you pointed out. One is that science has been so male dominated. That, I mean, you look at someone like Jane Goodall, she was originally mocked for naming animals rather than giving them a designation, the kind of thing Elon Musk would name his child. An XC, exclamation mark, whatever it would be. We had named one troop, they all began with E, another, they all began with B. And she, as she described them, she would say this guy was grumpy on this day. And people say, no, animals don't have emotions. Like, have you never owned a dog? Have you never owned this? They're merely responding to stimulus. Then what are we doing? What are we doing that's any different? And I think it took someone who was more emotionally intelligent and who could break off the shackles of scientific rigor, as Jane Goodall did, to make people pull their thumbs out of their eyes and actually start watching it properly.
Yeah.
But I think there's a massive amount of indigenous knowledge that we miss. We just miss because we're so convinced that, like you said, a white guy with his head in a book knows more than somebody who's lived their life and whose family have lived their life for generations in an area observing.
Absolutely. I mean, that night when we went to, we were tracking the aardvark, and Jack's camp was one of the most memorable, I think, nights I've ever had in the bush. It was just, well, first of all, to see one, it's very rare, very difficult. But when we were walking, trying to track it, and he or she just disappeared down this hole, and you could hear the burrowing noise, like as it dug its way into the ground. It was so fast, but really amazing experience.
I was going to say, you always hear they can dig faster than you can follow. And I tried to test that once. And yes, it's moving incredibly fast, but it's also really hard to follow an earth mover that throws the dirt backwards. So if you can hold your breath, maybe you can keep up with it, and hold your breath and move forward with your eyes shut, which I wouldn't recommend in a burrow. But anyway, sorry.
But talking a little bit about, classification and obviously scientific rigor versus indigenous observation and, intelligence and observation that's been passed down for generations. Have you, in your own experience, seen a big discrepancy between what the science says and how the indigenous tribes would describe them? And then secondly, of course, science, every year you hear more and more from scientists, these animals are much smarter than we thought they were. It's as if like we thought that all animals apart from ourselves were really thick, and now we're actually giving them the benefit of the doubt. But when you go out there, you actually realize that these animals are highly intelligent, conscious in many ways, of course, to varying degrees. But maybe you can tell us a moment where you've kind of got close to an animal and thought, oh my God, that animal's really very smart, maybe smarter than I am. Or at least had that moment where you kind of look at an animal and think, wow, it's sentient or conscious.
It's more that when they defy expectations. And so, I mean, I've been saying for decades, these animals don't read the same books we do. And I've spent most of my bush career in the Okavango Delta. Been lucky to go to a lot of other places. That is primarily a wetland. And a study done in Kenya probably doesn't apply to the behavior of animals in the Okavango. So even when I moved up there, I came from South Africa, the Sabi Sands Game Reserve. And you'd watch leopard all lie there, they'd be crossing a river, a shallow water. And on each step, they would flick the water from their paws, all 4 feet. And it was laborious and stupid. Like just walk across and shake it off at the end. It'd be like drying yourself every 30 seconds in the shower. Anyway, they'd do that because they hate having their feet wet. Then you get to the Okavango and you will see them playing. And I've seen lions, leopards, and cheetah run through water that they could have easily gone around. They are so accustomed to it. And so the behavior there is, and that's not a polar opposite, but an example which was 2 male cheetahs that were known as the steroid boys, unusually large for cheetahs, and they held a territory for far longer than is credible. But they were proper rock and roll wrestling cheetahs. They used to bring down adult zebra, which is again unheard of. That'd be like me beating Mike Tyson in a fight. And And at one case, they changed an antelope called a lechwe that you're very familiar with, but anybody that isn't, its defense is it runs to shallow water and it almost looks like a skimming stone. It has high rump, its feet are splayed, they don't sink in, and it just skims over the surface of shallow water. And any other predators are forced to slog through. Just that you think trying to run through knee-deep water versus open land, how much slower are you going to go? So the lechwe pogo has like 4 pogo sticks for legs and just bounces through. So this one ran into what amounted to not much more than a puddle. And normally a cheetah requires its prey to be running so it can trip it and grab the throat as it rolls. In this case, one walked in, grabbed it by the rump, and the other brother came and folded his legs behind the lechwe's horns and pushed its head into the water and drowned it. And it just decided that maybe, I mean, it's impossible to put yourself in the head of one of these animals. Maybe trying to strangle it from underneath put itself at risk. But somehow a cheetah knew it could kill an animal by drowning it, which nobody's ever recorded before, or as far as I know, since. But this guy did it. So there's just this idea, was that strategy or a fluke? Who knows? And I mean, and then in terms of just overall intelligence, anybody that has worked in a safari camp, run a safari camp, knows that baboons are far smarter than humans. And anybody that wants to dispute that in camp is just say, because baboons realize that a camp is a great source of food, just as a supermarket is from us. They're not stealing. They just, why work really hard out there when there's a one-stop shop? And every single camp manager is playing defense the entire time. You are never on the front foot. You are only ever reacting to baboons. You are never one step ahead. So that's when you start realizing, oh, we are nowhere near as clever as we think we are. So it's a great humbling lesson to receive.
Yeah, I mean, spending time in the Okavango recently, I mean, the baboons, they're naughty as hell. They're pretty violent as well. Mm-hmm. They can be quite aggressive, huh? But as soon as you have lunch, out they come. But yeah, I mean, incredible to watch. Have you had much time or spent much time with chimps or the larger primates like chimps and gorillas? Have you spent much time with them?
I've spent a bit of time with lowland gorillas in the Congo, but there's 2 Congos. So there's the DRC, which is the completely insane Congo. And then there's the Republic of Congo, which is the moderately sane one, where the capital is Brazzaville, and spent some time with the gorillas there. And that's pretty extraordinary. Something I would recommend for anybody is to go see gorillas if they can.
It's definitely on my wish list. So hopefully quite soon. But bringing it back to the camp, you are, of course, a camp manager as well. Tell us a little bit more, maybe some stories of the challenges, because of course, guests go to these safari lodges. They expect everything to run smoothly, but of course, nature always has a little trick up her sleeve. Tell us a bit about the challenges you faced in running a camp. Oh, talking about your camp, I can hear a challenge in the background.
Oh, you can pick up on that, can you? Yeah. Yes, my daughter, I believe that's antibiotics being administered. Sensitive microphone.
Oh.
Oh. Yeah.
She's okay.
I mean, here's a challenge for you. Try meeting. No, she's fine. Try meeting a woman when you live in a tent. Try meeting a woman that doesn't have fur. Let me put it to you that way. That's certainly a challenge. And everybody says, oh, it must be like being a ski instructor. And it's like, no, the guests are newlyweds or nearly dead. So there's not a lot of opportunity there. And I was a young man. I missed out on all of those shagadelic years. So, bit of disappointment, really.
But Peter, you hear about khaki fever. Is that, well, first of all, can you explain that to those of us who are less educated about it? And secondly, did you ever experience this?
Yeah. So khaki fever is the name given to the passion certain women or men can feel for someone in uniform. And when you're a safari guide, I mean, you've often got epaulets. We all know how much sexier they make you. And you're wearing khaki the whole time. It's ridiculous. Animals are colorblind. You could wear pretty much any color, but there are certain people, and it's akin to them being starstruck of you. And of course, the added sexiness of you driving the vehicle. Maybe you've got a rifle or not. You know about this exotic place. And so some women fall hard, and it's very infrequent for a start that you have young, attractive women, or let's just say attractive women in the camp. And even less so that that's the one that gets khaki fever. So one case I had was members of the American women's rugby team on safari, and they were great fun. And then they had a few drinks under their belt, and 3 of them, who all played in the front row, packed down and said, "Come on, scrum against us, scrum against us." And there's certain things, you're meant to be just attending to your guests' needs as best you can. I was like, no, please. No, I'm not doing that. For one thing, I wish I was half as masculine as any of them. And I'm saying that with due respect. They would have all been better rugby players than me as well. They had a lot of attributes I would have liked, but none of the attributes led to me desiring any of them. And I really wasn't sure if I wasn't going to end out as the hooker in that proposition. So a lot of rugby talk today. I don't normally do this. But yeah, that was a time where I actually thought, I am slightly fearing for my chaste virtue here. I didn't really imagine that would be the case.
No, it sounds very dangerous. Dangerous situation indeed. But I'm glad that, you're here to tell the tale. But sure, I mean, taking it back to more of a serious tone, I mean, you are essentially guiding and making sure that these guests, a lot of them who are city slickers, have never been out of the city, are having a great holiday, but surrounded by potentially dangerous animals. For example, hippo, buffalo, and some of the big cats, obviously. How do you go about drawing that balance? And have you had any stories where guests have kind of got close to being attacked or mauled?
Yeah, and I think there's always 2 pieces to these puzzles. So most people are pretty respectful of the environment. I think if you've come on safari, it's because you've got an interest in a wilderness area or animals. And obviously we hold people back a bit. What we're doing with them is not what we might do if we were by ourselves. We might push the boundaries a bit further, which is actually, it sounds, again, like a cowboy sort of behavior, but it's really good as a guide to know if you go closer than this, the animal will react in a negative way. And it's not necessarily about you being in danger, but it's you upsetting the wildlife. And then you're going to stop seeing them. They'll just move out of the way. So there are little testers done, but every now and then you get someone who cannot bear the idea of someone else holding the keys. And I had an incident like that with a German guy, and let's just call him Gunther. That sounds right. And, my mate Gunty just rankled at, I was probably 22 or 23, and that, I think doubly irked him. One, that I had the knowledge and the power in this place, and that I was so young. And he was probably the most defiant person I had had on safari until Russians started turning up. And that's a whole other kettle of sturgeon. That's every other nationality's been forgiven. But then we went to a place, and as you know, you do your drive, you see some fantastic animals, hopefully some great animal behavior. And then often you just have a break in the morning, drive, stop for a cup of coffee, tea, normally somewhere scenic, typically overlooking water. And I'd done that in a place called Lechwe Haven. And I said, okay, so get out, stretch your legs. As I was setting up the coffee basket, the biggest crocodile I've seen in Africa was in here, and it was about 4 meters. And a crocodile will come its own body length out of water after prey. So you decide how close to the edge you want to go. I put it to them like that, a little flippantly. And I was sitting, making up my coffee, And I just watched Gunter just start striding straight towards the water's edge. There's a moment of, you know what, let it happen. And then I saw a croc on a far bank go in. And I just thought, oh, I can't have this on my conscience or professional record. So I started moving towards him, calling his name. And luckily his wife started shouting at him as well. And when I literally just had to grab him and pull him back from what he was deliberately ignoring me. And he turned and took a swing at me. And it was just absolutely absurd. And then his wife piled in, which was fantastic. I loved it. She came over and started slapping him. And I thought, this is a fun relationship. And I just disentangled myself. But she had actually seen the croc go in as well. And so she was shouting at him. I don't speak German, but enough to understand that I had been trying to save his life. And he just remained furious with me. But all three, normally you can turn it around. You have a drink around the fire and it sorts itself out. He just decided not to like me for the whole trip. And to this day, I've kind of thought, aside from the intestinal disorder the crocodile would have got, would it have been a bad thing if I just left him there?
Our Future Nature is also brought to you today by Authentic Journeys. Authentic Journeys brings together high-performing entrepreneurs, CEOs, leaders, and changemakers with ancient and modern modalities for intense personal growth to deeply align your individual and our collective purposes for positive change in the world. All of our trips are carbon offset, and we only partner with companies that have sustainable practices and credentials. Let us take you on a journey that will enrich your mind, body, and soul while helping the planet and local communities. Check out authenticjourneys.com. That's AWETHENTIC journeys.com to learn more about our upcoming wellness experiences, travel adventures, and retreats to help you find your all. Gunter is a lucky man, I guess.
See, now you know not to cross me.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of managing camps, obviously, you know, you went from camp manager, you've been a guide. You're also a photographer, a man of many talents. Tell us a little bit about your photography.
I'm flattered that you would say that because I've seen your output. That's amazing. I mean, you and I are often in the same place, just in different vehicles, and you get far better photos than I. But it's something which I've only ever treated as a hobby. But I'm fortunate just to have so much opportunity that I'm often in the right place and take it a lot. And again, 30 years in, you start recognizing either how an animal's going to behave. So you're in the right place to take the photograph, or you've just made enough mistakes that you can start saying, this is what I should be doing with the light. And I think photography for me now is a medium to get people's attention, and then to be able to talk about wildlife. And I tend to, again, to the flippant, but what I'm trying to do is trick people into not noticing how much they're learning, or that there's a conservation message buried in there as well. And because conservation can be pretty grim in its messaging. And I've seen it done really heavy-handedly where there's people and they're on safari. And as you said earlier, they're on holiday. You know, their primary aim is to enjoy themselves. You got somebody saying, here's an elephant and it's endangered because you bastards don't recycle. And it's just like, whoa, back off, seduce. Let's go more carrot than stick here. And I think with conservation messaging is just, again, if people fall in love with the elephant, and then only then, once they've realized, going back to what you're talking about, they are intelligent, they're sentient, they live rich emotional lives with lifelong bonds, as long as any human bonds. And so their extinction crisis should affect us as much as what's happening in Ukraine does. We should feel very strongly about this with elephants. But you've got to get the people in love with the elephants first before you can drop the bomb on them that one is poached every 15 minutes across Africa. And so in the space of a day, what's that? That's 96 elephants will be killed. each and every day. And then it was a few years back that actually deaths surpassed births. So we are now on that downwards trend that it's so hard to recover from. But if you lead with that, you've lost their attention, you've lost their sympathy. And I think that's, so again, to come back around from all the tangents I've just gone on, photography for me is a way to seduce people first and foremost. And then you get the messaging in behind it if people want to hear it.
Absolutely. A lot of the work that I do, is photography, film-based, raising awareness. At the end of the day, though, people can see all these images on screens, on Nat Geo. They can see the photographs, but there's nothing quite like seeing an elephant up close. You just don't get that sixth sense, that feeling that, the subsonic kind of hums that they make, the communication. You can see the intelligence, the emotional, spiritual bonds that they have. But yeah, those photos and films just can't convey the spiritual feeling you have when you see these elephants up close in the wild. That's what I was trying to say. And I don't think any photograph can really communicate that in its entirety.
No, I don't. And I think it's also, it's multi-sensory. You mentioned it's not just seeing it, it's hearing it, feeling those low rumbles. And when I say feeling, you're hearing them with your whole body. It's a vibration. And I've been in both with lions roaring and with elephants rumbling, where the metal of the vehicle I've been in has vibrated in sync with it. And that's power. That's an extraordinarily powerful thing. And if you consider humans evolved in Africa, the potency of those sounds and what they would have meant for our ancestors, I believe it's been passed down. I would have shouted poppycock or some such thing at the idea of deep race memory until I was close to a lion that roared, and this ancient part of me woke up and said, climb a tree, you bloody idiot. It was every instinct I had was to get away. And subsequent studies done on human infants, 18 months and younger, and chimps has shown we're actually born with a fear of snakes and spiders. We don't learn that. Other fears we learn, but snakes and spiders we are born with. So we do have embedded in our DNA something from Africa. And to me, that's really powerful. And when you're out there, the smells, there's an entire school of thought about the smell of acacia wood smoke gives us a sense of homecoming, as our ancestors would have sat around these fires. And I love that idea. I would have poo-pooed it not so long ago, but now I'm a very firm believer in that we all have some connection still to the place we evolved. That's about as spiritual as I'll ever get.
Yeah, I was going to cry there or tear up, Peter. I wasn't prepared for this, but you're absolutely right. I mean, when you're in the Makati-Kati salt pans or in the Okavango Delta, I mean, there is something really primeval that you're connected to there. And anyone who goes there feels in a way that, I know it seems trite or it's been said many times, but you really feel like you're home in many ways. And I mean, a lot of the recent research that's been done, it suggests that the first modern day humans or the first Homo sapiens came out of that area. And there's a lot of evidence showing that, that was the cradle, that was the Garden of Eden. Do you think that that's true, that we kind of first sort of started walking on two legs in that area, or first emerged from that area around the Makati-Kati and Okavango?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it's true. And I think people would say, hang on, what about East Africa? And East Africa, they find a lot of the fossils, but not necessarily of Homo sapiens. And we're pipsqueaks. We're absolute babies. We've only been around 300,000 or so years. Prior to that, we've got a few million years of evolutionary history and all of our cousins that we find skeletons from. And to put this in perspective, a fossil is an incredibly unlikely thing to happen. If you run the numbers, and if all 7 billion Homo sapiens on the world today died right now, statistically, we would be left with half a skeleton likely to be fossilized. That's how uncommon it is for something to fossilize. So there were so many different species of humans that we've just got no record of. We are just the only remaining one. In that sense, we're like the aardvark. At one point, there were lots of aardvarks. Now there's only one. And we are this, there's actually a term for it, an endling, the endling of our genus. We are the last of our kind or kinds. And at one point, we lived alongside many other human species. They just weren't Homo sapiens. But I love the idea that Homo sapiens split off from an ancestor on the shores of Lake Maharikari, which is now the salt pans that you mentioned. But a lot of the animals there would have been the same as you see in the Okavango today. A lot of those same species, the bulk of them would be the same. So it's no surprise that that extraordinary wetland is where so many people sit there. And I particularly love it when they came to Africa reluctantly. They're there as, dragged by a spouse or partner or parent. And when you see the lights go on.
And since we're getting spiritual, let's do it. Let's go deep, as someone, I haven't spent nearly as much time in the wild as you have. But as someone who is spending more and more time in the wilderness, of course, you have to ask yourselves, just how do we get to this stage where in many ways we are rationally very intelligent compared to a lot of animals. We are amazing socially intelligent creatures. But we're so far removed from the rest of the bunch. Yes, sure, we're closely related to the gorillas and chimps, but it just seems so odd that we are almost able to bend the rules of nature, whereas other animals aren't able to get out of that, to able to bend the laws of nature or live outside the laws of nature. And of course, that our ability to do that is leading to our demise and to the demise of the rest of the biosphere. So do you ever think about the origin of man? Do you think that we, as Darwin might have said, are just descended from our cousins because we are fitter and we survived? Or do you think there's something else deeper than that? Do you think there was an alien influence? Or do you think that, it was, Planet of the Apes, the big black pillar came down? Do you ever think about that? You must, think about our origins and how we came to be. I mean, what do you think is the story? Because no one really has an answer. But what do you think? How do you think we evolved to where we are now?
So I'm content with not having all the pieces of the answer. I don't mind sharing ancestry with the living apes that we had shared a recent ancestor. I'm not grabbing at a creator origin yet, but if solid evidence arrives for it, fantastic. How exciting would that be? And it doesn't need to be a deity. Like you said, maybe it's aliens. Fantastic. There is or was something out there with hopefully a lot more intelligent than us. But in the meantime, I think that our big brains are just a fluke like a giraffe's neck or any other the flying snakes of Borneo, just something so odd and extreme, considering their relatives. And I just think that we're perhaps a little bit too proud of our intelligence. Like we pat ourselves on the back. A cheetah is the fastest animal in the world, but make sure to stay shit scared the entire time because things can still go wrong even though you're the fastest. I think we are so confident in our brain's ability to get ourselves out of trouble that we keep putting ourselves into it. And I don't know why we're so proud of our intelligence. We are doing to the earth what a meteor did 65 million years ago. We are literally as stupid as a rock. And aren't we the cleverest species on earth? And once we've wiped it out, I don't think we qualify for that anymore. And, all the things that did not wipe out the earth can probably hang on to that and just not us. We get to be the dumbest.
I think you touched on a great point there. A lot of people, in my talks, they say, how do we save the planet? No, we're not going to save the planet. We're just talking about, can we save ourselves from going extinct. We're destroying the biosystems that support our very existence. The planet will be just fine if we destroy everything. It'll regenerate in a few million years. We won't be around. But and it's the hubris of mankind to think that we can actually influence the outcome of the planet. I think all we can do is try and mitigate the damage that we've done at this point. I mean, let's not get too depressed with climate change, but really we've caused so much damage already. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to fix them.
See, I love what you've just said, and I have never thought of it that way before, that we're not trying to save the planet, we're trying to save ourselves. And, from a marketing spin, it's actually got to be that. And I think this is the bubble that you and I both live in, and presumably your listeners as well, if they're listening to a podcast about nature, is we are most likely our friends are not trophy hunters or consumers of rhino horns. We could not be friends with those people. And so within that bubble, we don't realize how few people give a flying fart about nature and wildlife. And it's reflected in, if you look at charitable donations, wildlife gets less than 1 cent of every dollar given in the US, or 1 pence out of every pound in the UK. And it just shows that what people actually care about, health, a lot more money going to health, kids' health in particular. I don't begrudge that. But wild animals, fraction of each dollar given to charities by corporations, by private individuals, it's not really high on people's priority. And it's going to take a wake-up call like this 40-degree day in the UK. The stereotypically grey and pizzling UK is baking in the sunlight. There's acres of pasty flesh with bad tattoos all over the place. We've seen it around the world, these extreme weather events. Maybe that's where people start saying, well, this is inconveniencing me now, so I'd like to act on it. I think the greatest thing that's happening with climate change is insurance companies are now starting to charge more and refuse to insure the seaside mansions of millionaires and billionaires. And so now it's going to be like, oh, well, we better do something about this then. If my place in Malibu can't be insured, this has now become very, very real. You take the silver lining where you can.
Absolutely. And that's why I think that film, Don't Look Up, really encapsulated that sort of ludicrousy and hypocrisy of the whole of the human effort right now. As you say, Europe is burning. And we're investing more and more into fossil fuels than ever before because of the war with Russia. It's just beyond belief. What scares me, of course, is like we had the pandemic, as atrocious as it was, as lethal as it was for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It stopped us from going out. We all got locked down as a species, and we only reduced the carbon footprint or carbon emissions by 9% for 2021, I believe. And that to me just sums up the enormity of the challenge, because not only do we have to stop emitting carbon emissions like now, we have to suck carbon out of the atmosphere in order to keep within the 1.5 to 2 degree threshold, which we know we're not going to hit. We're not going to keep it under 2 degrees. We're already at 1.5 and climbing very fast.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that with species extinction as well. There was a brief lull in poaching. So once all these lockdowns hit and people could not travel, the true importance of the safari industry or tourism within conservation was shown, because if you look at a heat map of poaching sites, they are never near a game drive road. There's a safari road. They're always away from it. So every safari vehicle is an anti-poaching unit. They're not engaging with poachers. It's not a dangerous activity. But poachers know that those are eyes and ears. Even just seeing human tracks crossing a road, a guide would say, there's somebody's been walking here that shouldn't be here straight away. The real anti-poaching units could go check it out. With those gone, poaching started coming right up towards camps. There's a camp in Botswana where poachers spent a night or two in one of the tents one of the safari tents was brazen. There were caretakers there, and they just chose an end tent. Absolutely brazen. That's how bold they were getting. So this brief lull, which was because people might be killing elephants or rhinos, but there was no shipping for a short while. And they're just sitting on a mountain of evidence. After that, once shipping came back, which was pretty quick, it went into overdrive. And rhinos were just and are being absolutely hammered. I gave the timing earlier. It's an elephant every 15 minutes. A rhino is about every 8 hours. So it sounds less severe, but we've got just under 500,000 elephants, and we're talking the most populous of the rhino species, the white rhinos, 20,000. And again, the deaths versus births is terrifying. We are looking at just rhinos being extinct. I've got kids. My oldest is 6. At this point, it seems unlikely that there will be wild rhinoceros by the time she's in her 20s. And that would happen a hell of a lot faster if it wasn't just that they're getting so rare, poachers find that it's harder for a poacher to find one. So that's pretty terrifying. And this is where we know these numbers are freely available, but just as with climate change, people switched off, don't look up, and went through to the Squid Game instead because it's more appealing than the truth.
Yeah, it's shocking. I actually went to see the northern white rhino in Lewa before the last male passed away. So that was a species that was going extinct right in front of my eyes. It was really, really very sad. And as you say, rhinos are getting hit harder than elephants. And, having done years of awareness raising and trying to stop the illegal wildlife trade in Hong Kong with the ivory and the rhino horn being translocated through the city, it's crazy to me that we're having such a hard time getting people to stop procuring and consuming these animal parts for pure luxury. It's mind-boggling. And a lot of people often ask, why do you photograph the elephants? I don't know. Well, they're the most charismatic, magnificent creatures. If we can't get people to stop killing them, how do we get people to start caring about the small stuff? The small stuff like the bees, like the insects that we are wiping out. They're the creatures that we actually depend more on for our everyday survival. Insectageddon is a very real thing. Yeah. And because the rampant use of pesticides, of industrialized agriculture, and we've depleted our soils, that's actually more scary than if we lose all the elephants tomorrow. But again, you can't just bash people on the head with that every day.
No, and I agree with you. There's it's interesting when you speak to someone, and if I was to say, criticize how lax Hong Kong is on ivory, which has often been the gateway through to mainland China for ivory trade, say, well, you're not from there, you don't have a right to say something. And I think what we're now learning is that climate change is affecting us all. We can all have a say about the emitters. That's fair that we do that. And a point that I often make to Americans is that they are reliant on the mahari-hari pans, which has been brought up a few times. It's the biggest network of salt pans on the planet. And NASA identified it as one of the 5th or 6th most nutrient-rich places on the planet. You can always get confused. And nothing's growing out there, but it's because of salt on the surface and a lack of rainfall. Nothing grows there, but it was the floor of a lake. It's got all of those sediments. It's full of goodness. And every year there is a regular wind that picks up nutrients from there, and it blows around the world and lands in the agricultural belt of the United States. One year the winds misfired slightly, and it actually caused a brownout in New York, a sandstorm in New York. And that was Botswana, playing tourist to the Statue of Liberty and Empire State and so on. So this idea that what happens over that part of the world is not going to affect me over that part of the world. We've got to scrap the notion of borders when it comes to conservation, when it comes to the future of our species and the environments we live in, because if we could get a unified policy on climate change, it would be extraordinary. If we could get people to work together instead of this nitpicking. If we could get political will in Vietnam just to say, oh, no, we're getting rid of rhino horn. And the only people they'd be putting out of business are criminals. the same people who run the rhino horn syndicates, the ones that run the heroin trade and sex trafficking rings for women, kids, and so on. So if we're putting them out of business or taking money from their pocket, surely that's a good thing. You don't need to care about conservation to think that that's a good thing, I think, unless you're really into heroin and despicable acts with children. So anybody that says, what does this matter? They're blinkered. And I often say you don't need to be interested in conservation to not feel desperate about it. All of these things are going to affect you, whether you live in New York, never leave it, or Singapore, where I believe you are now, Hong Kong, which we've mentioned. All of you, you're going to be affected by the depletion of nature. Now
absolutely, it's it's the interconnectedness of everything that humans still have a hard time comprehending. I mean, without wanting to be too bleak, you said that your daughter, probably by the time she's 20, 25, there will be no wild rhinoceros in Southern Africa. Do you think that's the case for elephants or other species? There are only 7,000 cheetah, for example. There are only less than 5,000 wild dogs. What's your take? What's your prognosis for that? Do you think they're going to survive?
I think there'll be far fewer of all of them. And I think the way that a lot of documentaries present wild places is that they're somewhat boundless. And I think there's been a shift in this, and it's great. There's more of a reality check, even if it's just in the tech end of it. Again, they don't want to be too grim. But this idea that Africa is just a sea of wildlife with small pockets of humanity is very much the opposite. It's an ocean of humans with small, shrinking islands of wilderness left. And that is not the fault of the African people. We're all sitting, again, I'm sitting here in the UK, and I can wave a fist down south towards Africa saying, yeah, you stupid bastards, what are you doing? Why are you killing all your animals? But I don't need to worry about bears taking the kids to school because they got wiped out a long time ago. And, I don't need to worry about wolves because they were wiped out a long time ago. And if there was a suggestion they were brought back, I, for one, would be all for it. Run faster, kids. But I imagine I would be alone in the community and our house would have eggs thrown at it for my advocacy. So there's a lot of hypocrisy when we shake a fist at people far less well off than us. But, bringing it back, I think those islands are going to shrink and shrink. Some of them will disappear altogether. And that's not to say that the effort is not worth it. If you had a friend or loved one of any sort who was ill, you would fight tooth and claw to keep them healthy, see if you can get them healthy, see if you can bring them back. And I think that's what conservationists, people like yourself and the people I work with, is just say, we will, look at the Ukrainians, what an inspiration. You turn, you fight, you're outnumbered, you're outgunned. I bet you will fight. And I think that's really what we're doing in conservation. And there's a lot more it feels like there's a lot more intelligence to it now than there was when I first started out. Conservation used to be about better fences, and now it's about better relationships. I think that's what's going to swing it around. That's where the hope lies.
Yeah, very well said. And it is a tough fight, but I think you touched upon a very important truth there, that it's almost it is a moral obligation to try and save these animals. It's not just, what do they matter to us? They don't benefit us. It's a moral duty to preserve these beautiful creatures and preserve the biodiversity for future generations. And we have to do everything we can to do that. How do you kind of navigate that very tricky discourse when you talk to people about conservation?
Conservation is now about better relationships. And I think mentoring people, finding people in communities who have an interest in conservation and were sidelined by white men because they didn't have a PhD from the right university. That's not how it can be. And every panel I see on conservation, it's a lot of white guys, and that's got to change. And it probably won't happen quickly. Old white guys get a firm grip on things. There's a lot of Rupert Murdochs of conservation out there. And, but it will change or we lose everything. And that's where I'm far more interested when people are talking about conservation in Africa. It's like, well, it's an African problem, but a lot of the solutions are in Asia. And rather than wave a fist, let's engage. Let's find out who's using rhino horn, who's using ivory, why are they using it, what could deter them from doing that. That saves you. If you can start figuring that out, it's going to ultimately be a lot more effective than boots and bullets. Those are still relevant and important, but that's a finger in the dike. And that's reference to Holland, the Netherlands. Just in case anybody's thinking that I'm being anti-woke just for its own sake.
Noted. Which brings us...
Now you're nervous of how many people I've just offended.
Ooh. Someone might be hunting something else very soon.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so which brings us to quite an interesting conversation before we start talking about a bit more about natural selection and the company you've helped found and set up. The government in Botswana has allowed hunting again, hunting of elephants. And of course, that's caused an outcry in a lot of the conservation community within Botswana. For example, the Joubers wrote an open letter to the government criticizing them and telling no one to come into Botswana as a protest. Since then, the Joubers haven't been let back into Botswana. So there's a very tricky dichotomy here. I said tricky again, but I guess it's a political dichotomy and one which is not easy to navigate. But how can you have, on the one hand, a country that's trying to do these luxurious safaris for conservation, and then they're allowing hunting on the other hand? And how do we reconcile those two industries? Because on the one hand, photo safaris are amazing and beneficial and bring in a lot of money, but can they bring in enough to support these concessions and areas if hunting is removed entirely?
I think they can bring in enough money. And it is something where, so I disagreed with the reintroduction of hunting. I emotionally 100% disagree. I disagree with trophy hunting completely on an emotional level. But then President Masisi of Botswana made a point when there was the outcry where he said, okay, this is absolutely fine. I will donate 200 elephants to each and every country that wants to put some sanctions on Botswana. And you let them loose in the areas you live and see how you feel about it then. And again, I disagree with his sentiment entirely, but I can't argue against what he's saying there. And elephants have been expanding into areas where they've not been in generations, if at all, before. There's a community south of the Okavango where about 200 elephants have turned up. They're trashing crops. There is no tourism industry down there. I don't know what the solution is. I wish I had the intellect, this big Homo sapiens brain, to come up with a way of getting these elephants to leave that area. But there are resources there for them. They've discovered it. They've got no reason to leave. And even if you move them away, it's true, elephants do not forget. They will find their way back. So in that instance, you think, well, if they're going to be culled and there is a revenue to be made from it, who cares that it's trophy hunting? I still rankle with that, because the idea that trophy hunting is for conservation is absolute, thorough, utter, steaming pile of bullshit. Nobody hunts an elephant because they're hoping to conserve it. That's just crap that they speak. That's like somebody saying, the only reason that I sleep with prostitutes is to create jobs for women. It's very important to me. And it's like, you understand there's far better ways to do that. So you would never believe the second guy in that scenario. So I don't know that hunters even believe themselves when they're saying, oh no, I hunt lions so that villagers get fed. So what are you doing for villagers when you're not hunting lions? And why is it that every single trophy hunter's a white guy? And I'm talking about the actual guys that lead the hunts. Why is that industry not evolved? The photographic industry's moved to almost entirely local management. There are a few exceptions, but that's been a paradigm shift just in my era, in the time I've been doing this. Hunting, it's still white guys, and it's because the people coming in don't want to sit with black Africans. So there's this racist element to it. It is not for conservation. It's a really despicable industry. But then there's this small part that says, and here's some numbers that show that these communities would just poach the elephants, exacerbate the issues in place if they weren't deriving benefit from the trophy hunting industry. So you can tear yourself apart between your feelings and your intellect on trophy hunting.
Yeah, very well said. Those white hunters tend to be cigar touting white hunters with big biceps in general. Why do you think that people get a kick out of hunting? And a lot of the time, these hunters from abroad, they tend to be dentists or insurance brokers, wealthy, generally speaking. But what do you think? Do you think they really get a kick out of it? What is the actual danger in shooting an animal from 50 yards behind a safari trail? I just don't get what the thrill might be of seeing an elephant collapse on the ground. Maybe I'm missing something.
It is absolutely, it's a bragging thing. And I think the reason it's mainly men is we are hardwired to show off. And to me, and we all do it in different ways. And we're doing it whether we realize it or not. And for them, it's, the neighbor's got a Porsche. So if I get a Porsche, I'm not one-upping him. I could get a Ferrari, but to be honest, I can't. What costs the same as a Porsche? Oh, shooting an elephant and a lion. Well, he's never done that. And I've spoken to people who've been in the industry, who've changed tack, and they all say that, up to 90% of the animals killed, it's actually the professional hunter, the person who by law accompanies them, who actually shoots the animal ultimately. So the dentist fires and hits it in the back leg as it's trying to race off to the bushes to bleed out. It's the trophy hunter who puts the kill shot in. And then, of course, the dentist has it mounted like this, as if he shot it as it leapt to attack him. That didn't happen. So you're a feeble liar if you shoot a lion or an elephant and then pretend that it somehow makes you a superior human being. As you might have noticed, these people irk me. It's just such a lying and corrupt industry. Again, when hunters go, oh yeah, and the money goes back to a village, like, prove it. Every study has shown that 90-something% of it stays with the hunter. They are not better off economically by this happening. Some very rare examples where that's not true. And you're trusting a system. They might go and do a hunt in Zimbabwe, and they're going to trust that the Zimbabwean government is incorruptible when it comes to quotas. Oh no, they're only taking a healthy number of male lions each year to make sure that the pride stay intact. Would you put your money in a Zimbabwean bank? And their answer to that would be no. So then why do you trust that this is well regulated? Again, bullshit. That's all it is.
Totally agree with you. And I think, one final point on this hunting theme that I wanted to make is my observation in the wild is that most animals are pretty scared of humans. Certainly in the Maasai, you get out, a lion sees a human a mile off, they'll run away. Most animals just want to get out of your way, unless you're really, up its trunk or right in its space, like a hippo. Most of the time, they don't want to risk fighting, right? And I would even venture to say that animals, generally speaking, are scared of humans. And yet the hunting industry has kind of created this artifice, the big five, these incredibly dangerous creatures that will kill you unless you kill them first, probably to benefit the hunting industry. Now, it's all very well me saying this for the comfort of modern civilization. I'm sure living amongst these animals hundreds of years ago, we would be more exposed and more vulnerable. But nowadays, they aren't dangerous to us, by and large. Yes, you do get human-wildlife conflict. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I mean, my sense is that most of the time, animals are scared of us rather than the other way around. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And you will get, so just as we spoke about baboons raiding a camp, you might have an elephant raiding crops or a lion taking cattle. And that has an incredibly serious impact on the life of an agriculturalist who's in a remote rural area in any country in Africa. And they will have no love for elephants or lions. And I can understand that completely. They love them as much as we love the tax man, because that's what these things are doing, but they're not even getting the benefit of hospitals built, roads made. So I understand why those communities detest a lot of large wildlife. But then if you say to the hunter, okay, here's an elephant that's consistently raiding crops. If you're really doing this because it can benefit it, that's the one we need to take out. Oh, by the way, it's one of those elephants that has no tusks. They won't go near it. Or it's a male lion, but he doesn't have a mane. They won't go near it because it's all about the biggest and the best. And that's how, again, it's just about showing off. Or even if you say it's an elephant, but one of his tusks is broken. He's only got one tusk. No, they don't want it. They want the nice, even, large set. And that would be, this whole idea of, oh, we only take the males past their prime. Bullshit. A male lion past his prime is dead within weeks because he loses his territory and he dies almost straight away. They're not catching that window. That's not happening. And the idea that an elephant is past his prime, they've shown that their breeding peak carries on right up to close to death. What they're doing is effectively is if we said, you can now trophy hunt humans, but only those that are 6'5" or over. Pretty soon, basketball is going to get a lot less interesting. And suddenly you notice that the average human height starts shrinking down, because then they're going to say, "Ooh, well, we've run out of 6'5"ers. We're dropping it to 6'3" and then to 6 foot. And, the next thing, only the Hobbit hole in Manila has got any patrons in. And that's exactly what they're doing. Animal sizes are shrinking because of trophy hunting, and poaching's played a part as well. So again, it's bullshit. Everything they say, everything they write, everything they say. And that the sad reality is the funding for a lot of this, the lobbying for Botswana to resume trophy hunting, elephant hunting, came from Safari Club International, which is in part or largely funded by the NRA. And the NRA, as we all know, has hijacked American democracy, which is why they didn't care when Russia did it. So they're used to it. But in terms of that, so as a conservationist or as somebody opposed to trophy hunting, that's what you're up against. We are up against billions of dollars. And again, we're getting less than 1 cent of every dollar from charitable donations around the globe. So it's a very uphill battle.
Thank you for calling them out. I've never heard anyone call them out quite so candidly. So I think what you just said was brilliant. And you just put a target on your head, Peter, but it's okay. Right. You passed your prime, mate. It's all right.
That's it. Yeah. But if they want to shoot me with a dart gun and give me a vasectomy, all for it.
But yeah, you make a good point about evolutionary pressure. And we sometimes think that evolution moves in slow motion, but you do see a lot more tuskless females in the wild now, tuskless female elephants, because of that pressure. Or the females or the males getting with big tusks are getting wiped out. And the recessionary gene for tuskless females is growing stronger in the population.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, evolution can take a long time to do things, but it can also be close to static for a while. And then there is an event. There's a great book called The Beak of the Finch that talks about this, and it's set in the Galapagos. But you might have an island breaks away from the mainland, and that's going to place brand new pressures there, and a ton of them are going to die off. And those that survive due to some dominant or beneficial trait will become the new form of that animal. And I think this is something people mistake with evolution, that it has a purpose. It's always building towards the better. There's a phenomenon on islands where typically mammals get smaller. So in human history, within human times, there were elephants in Crete, the island of Crete. They were tiny. They would have been shoulder height on, me, and I'm like 5'9" or so. Tiny little elephants, because that's all the island could support. So evolution is not always about bigger, stronger, faster, better, smarter. It's about survival. Darwin actually never said survival of the fittest. That was a journalist describing his book.
Which brings us beautifully to natural selection. So tell us a bit more about natural selection, what you're doing with this company, why it's so important. To our listeners, Natural Selection is a safari company. I've been to 2 or 3 of their camps, Jack's camp being one of them. It's a phenomenal camp in the Makati. But I'll let you describe a bit more, Peter, about why this is such a special company. Or not.
I think it's because it was founded about, no, it is. I believe it is. And obviously I'm paid to say so. They make me say this. No, I joined the company of absolute free will and delight, because the idea was, rather than forging ahead with a new idea, was actually winding the clock back a bit to when safaris were fun. And safaris seem to have taken a bit of a misstep in they've moved towards luxury, but the luxury was all about the camp rather than the experience. And a lot of the properties you go to now, they look magnificent in a magazine, but that sequin cushion is not so comfortable to sit on. So it was about saying that let's make this a human experience again and give people the opportunity to enjoy being in the wild. But the conservation message is through and through, if people want it. And even if they don't, just by coming on safari, they are philanthropists. So Patagonia, the clothing company, or outdoor company, I should say, started something called 1% for the Planet, which is a really fantastic initiative. And we decided to go a bit more, and it's 1.5% of our turnover, not our profit. 1.5% of our turnover is set aside for conservation programs. And conservation is, I'm using that word to encompassing community initiatives as well, because I believe that is the same thing. An example of that is one of our properties, Mapula, is very close in a straight line to a series of 3 villages. And the middle village has no school. So the kids have to walk either 8 or 12 kilometers for education. And we offered to build a school, but the government said they would not gazette it. So the kids wouldn't have an actual qualification. They couldn't afford the teachers and so on. And just didn't have the numbers. We offered to pay for that too. So what we ended up doing was buying 2 minivans, and we now deliver 176 children each day, morning and afternoon, to and from school. Out of a community of 1,000, on average, 2 a year were being killed by elephants. And since we've introduced them, and I'm touching wood, we've not had a fatality in 5 years. And that sounds like a straight community feel-good thing. But these people now have fewer reasons to dislike elephants. It's much easier to have a conversation about conservation. And it's also making us a good neighbor. We're employing a lot more from the village than they previously had. So poaching's dropped. Poaching's greatly reduced, because we can have these conversations now. And that's the kind of thing, it's an exciting thing to be a part of. Is I often describe natural selection as being fraudulent, because we're actually a conservation organization disguised as a tourism business. If we don't get the tourism business right, we don't generate funds. So we want people to come and have a fantastic stay, see a ton of animals, have fun, have a great holiday. And ideally, they're going to leave so in love with the place that they do want to protect it. They do want to be part of something that is looking after the land and maybe expanding wilderness areas. That's the dream. That's the biggest challenge of all, is can you can we take back some of the places that have gone to agricultural mining without negatively impacting our surrounding communities? And partner with them instead and say, we can give you a better life by doing this. And again, we've had some success with that as well. So it's an exciting thing to be a part of. We've got one area in Namibia, which was 100% trophy hunting, and it's now 100% photographic. And we are making the owner of that land more money than he ever made from trophy hunting. And I love that because he's going to tell his friends, the landowners, that story. And that's not the story you hear from the hunters, as you might imagine. So I love being a part of it. It's fantastic. So everybody come on safari, come with natural selection, and straight away you're doing good work.
Fantastic. And then just to follow on from that, I mean, you're contributing back to community conservation. What are you doing as a camp to minimize impact on your surroundings? For example, are you running on solar? What are the responsible kind of management procedures that you implement? Because obviously wherever the humans go, there's impact. How do you minimize human impact in those wild spaces?
That's again been a huge change that I've seen in 28 years. Is most properties have moved towards solar. You've got a generator sitting there, which is kept as a backup for that freak thing. As I said, raining in June, the solar just doesn't quite cut it. But solar technology is zipping along. We're getting new panels, new batteries that are just able to give us much more bang for our buck. And it's not cheap. When we rebuilt Jack's camp just a few years ago, it was over $1 million on the solar and on the batteries for it. And it's great. You're out the front of the camp, it's very Hemingway or Roosevelt. And out the back, it's all Elon Musk. It is literally Tesla batteries. But there's that. There's the way we handle food waste, moving from plastic single-use bottles to people arriving. I went alone in this. Here's one from property that's not ours that I brought back with me because I liked the bottle, and I think we should use a similar style. We're a very friendly industry. We might be. Don't say that name out loud. We might be competing for bums in beds, but we often share ideas. If somebody's got a good conservation initiative, we love to share it in the industry. Anybody else's success in conservation benefits us all. The safari industry is a fun one to be a part of. You have some personality clashes, but in general, we're all on the same page. And if somebody has a great technique for managing waste, they will tell us about it. And then we can work as a larger unit, get some economy of scale on it. And I love that. The way we treat wastewater has now got so much more sophisticated than it used to be. The way we heat water, all solar, used to be what we call a donkey boiler. It was a welded together metal stand. You lit a fire underneath it. Tell us when you'd like a shower, and some guy out the back would be lighting a fire and say, give it 10 minutes and then only shower for 10. That's obviously, so that's a reduction in firewood. It's a reduction in diesel that we not only have to burn, but transport out to the properties. The footprint of a safari camp has reduced drastically. Some places are shifting to electric vehicles. That's the more remote you get, the harder that is to manage. But we get better all the time, right? It's a fun process to be a part of. And 20 years from now, I'll look back at what we're doing now and mutter and shake my head at how stupid we are right now.
Well, Peter, I can hear your tribe kicking up a storm in the background, so I can't keep you for much longer. But for those listeners out there who want to make a difference, who want to do things better, what advice would you give them in, say, creating more conscientious businesses or social enterprises? Any words of wisdom before we sign off?
Yeah, I would think that you can have a positive impact wherever you live and find out what kind of nature there is in your local area and what threat there is to it. You can act locally, and all of these islands of wildlife have an important part to play. You might have a local park. I mean, again, in Shrewsbury I live, they've just reintroduced the European beaver, and that's a real positive. My mother-in-law actually signed me up for the local bird club, and I started reading the conservation work they're doing, restoration of wetlands. And again, I'm enjoying being a part of that. Africa always seems so glamorous. So, well, I should be acting more locally as well. As a business, offer your support to that. Maybe you might run a hardware store. Find out what your local bird club's doing, because bird clubs are often the ones doing a lot of work, as I said, places like wetlands. Maybe they're building a bird hide. Help them out with the resources you've got. If you run a sandwich shop, maybe you can take some sandwich shops to the people doing it. I don't know. There's always an opportunity to support conservation initiative. But maybe the best thing you can do is educate your own kids or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews. There's this little Goldilocks zone between about 7 to 8, 11 to 12, when kids can ask a smart enough question about the world and handle the sometimes tough answer you've got to give. And they're young enough not to be worried about being cool. Once they hit 11, 12, being cool is more important than anything. And they don't want to ask the questions and show that they care about anything, because, they got to be emo instead. But there's that little window there, that 7, where they can, it's okay for them to hear about climate change without making them sob themselves to sleep all night. You don't want that. That's when you hook them into conservation, and it's their future. You're doing them a disservice if you don't. So perhaps that's the opportunity of anybody that can't get on safari for whatever reason, is make sure that the next generation is committed. I think that's a really important thing.
Very wise words. Thank you, Peter. Been great chatting, hearing all your stories, but also opening you up and you showing us that you actually do care and you aren't stupid as a rock like the rest of us. But I think the best quote from the chat today was, make sure you are all still shit scared. And I think that's the main takeaway from today's chat. So thank you very much indeed. And I will remain shit scared, because I think we all have to remain shit scared if we're going to get through this. So thanks again. Enjoy the boiling heat in the UK in Shrewsbury, 800 meters from Darwin, with your family, and say hi to all the kids, and hopefully see you in the bush soon.
Yes, I will see you out there as soon as we can be there.
Cheers, Peter. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Our Future Nature. Please remember to like and subscribe to keep up with the latest episodes. And if you enjoyed the podcast, it'd be really helpful if you could take a few minutes to leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please also follow us on Instagram and Threads at Our Future Nature Pod for behind the scenes and additional resources, or on X at OFN_podcast. That's OFN_podcast. You can find our social media pages on the podcast episode description. You can also follow me at Lee-Davies if you want to be updated on the work that I do in green entrepreneurship, advocacy, and conservation. And finally, Our Future Nature is powered by the team at Authentic Studio. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.